Hey guys, welcome to the Vanished Lands. There is a diamond that has traveled across centuries, a jewel of impossible beauty. Yet wherever it has gone, it has left behind ruin, betrayal, madness, and death. Torn from a sacred temple, it blinded kings with its fire, lured queens to their downfall, and destroyed families who dared to call it theirs. Today it rests behind glass, admired by millions, but its story is written in blood, not light. This is the legend of the Hope Diamond, the jewel that watches, the curse that never sleeps. In the heart of India, long before empires rose and fell, long before the world was carved by borders and maps, there stood a temple so ancient that even the oldest priests whispered its name with trembling lips. It was said to be a place built not by human hands alone, but by the guidance of gods. Its pillars reached skyward like stone guardians, carved with faces of forgotten deities, their eyes hollow and eternal, watching every mortal who dared step into its shadow. Within its sanctum, behind doors sealed by ritual and guarded by silence, there rested a single jewel, a diamond unlike any ever seen. It was not white, nor clear, but a blue so deep it seemed to hold the midnight sky within its heart. Under the faintest flame, it glowed like frozen starlight, and under the gaze of the moon it shimmered as though alive, casting a light that was both beautiful and unsettling. The jewel was no ordinary treasure. It was set into the statue of a goddess, the goddess of war and retribution, her stone face both serene and merciless. Legends said the jewel was her eye, gifted to her by celestial beings, and that it was never meant to be separated from her gaze. Pilgrims traveled for weeks to kneel before her image, whispering prayers for protection, for vengeance, for justice. And always, their eyes were drawn not to her sculpted features, but to that single blue fire burning in the dimness. But every legend carries with it a shadow. The priests warned that to take the jewel from the goddess would be to invite her wrath, not only upon the thief, but upon every hand that dared to hold it afterward. It was said the jewel carried not wealth, but ruin, not life, but death. The warnings were etched into the temple's walls in languages half forgotten, carved deep so they could not be erased by time. Still, for some men, temptation proved stronger than fear. One such man came to the temple under the cover of night. He was no pilgrim, no humble seeker of blessings. He was a thief, hardened by hunger and greed, his heart scarred by poverty, his eyes filled with the desperate fire of ambition. He had heard the stories, of course, who in India had not, but he had also heard whispers of empires that would pay kingdoms of gold for such a gem, whispers of sultans and kings who would trade lands for its possession. To him, the curse was nothing more than superstition, the kind of tale priests tell to keep treasures hidden. He crept through the temple gates, moving past the sleeping guards. The air inside was heavy with incense, smoke curling like spirits across the floor. The silence pressed against his ears, broken only by the echo of his own footsteps. He passed through the grand hall, where hundreds of candles burned before lesser idols, their flames flickering as though sensing his presence. And then, at last, he stood before her. The goddess loomed above him, her form carved from black stone, her many arms raised in eternal power. Her eyes glared forward, merciless and all-seeing, and in the center of her brow, set into her forehead like the eye of eternity, burned the diamond. For a long moment, the thief hesitated. The jewel's light was not still but shifting, almost like a living flame. It seemed to watch him, to pulse with awareness. He felt the weight of countless generations pressing upon him, as though the statue itself were alive, breathing, waiting for him to make his choice. His mouth went dry. His heart raced. For the first time in years, he felt fear. But greed is a powerful master. He climbed the statue, hands trembling as they reached toward the jewel. His fingers brushed against its surface. Cold, too cold, as though he had touched a block of ice that had never known the warmth of the sun. He pulled harder, whispering curses under his breath, until finally, with a sound that echoed through the chamber like a scream, the diamond broke free. At that moment, the air shifted. The incense smoke swirled violently, though no wind touched it. The candles shuddered, their flames bending as though bowing to something unseen. And from the shadows of the sanctum, a sound rose. A low, distant hum, almost like chanting. The thief froze, clutching the jewel, his breath sharp in his chest. But when he looked around, there was nothing. Only the goddess's empty gaze, her brow bare, her vengeance silent. He descended quickly, hiding the jewel inside his robes, and fled the temple. He ran through the forest, branches tearing at his skin, his feet carrying him farther and farther from the sacred ground. He did not stop until the temple was only a memory behind him, swallowed by the night. But the night did not let him go. As he stumbled into a clearing, gasping for breath, he felt a sudden weight upon him. The air grew heavy. The stars above seemed to fade, swallowed by an unnatural darkness. He looked at the jewel in his hand, and for the first time he saw it not as a diamond, but as an eye that glowed with hatred, an eye that did not blink. He screamed and hurled it to the ground, but it did not fall. It hovered in the air for a heartbeat, then landed silently, gleaming with cold light. His skin crawled, his thoughts twisted. He heard whispers in a language he could not understand, words that clawed at his mind like talons. The sound grew louder and louder until it drowned out the forest, until it drowned out his own thoughts. And then silence. The villagers who searched for him later found only torn footprints leading into the clearing. No body, no blood, nothing but the jewel lying in the grass as though waiting. When the priests arrived, they fell to their knees, their faces pale. They lifted the diamond carefully, wrapping it in cloth, and carried it back to the temple. But the statue's gaze seemed darker now. Her stone face filled not with serenity, but with fury. The priests replaced the diamond, restoring it to the goddess's brow. But the whispers of doom only grew louder. For though the thief had vanished without a trace, the curse had not vanished with him. It lingered, coiled like a serpent, waiting for the next hand that would dare to claim the stone of eternal night. And so the legend began of a jewel that brought ruin to all who touched it. A jewel that could not be tamed by kings or priests, by merchants or thieves. A jewel that shimmered with beauty but carried only death. The Hope Diamond, as it would one day be called, had tasted its first victim, and it was hungry still. In the bustling heart of India, where the air rang with the cries of vendors and the scent of spices lingered over crowded streets, there lived a merchant whose name commanded both envy and respect. His ships crossed oceans, his caravans carried silk and jewels across deserts, and his vaults overflowed with gold. To the poor, he was a figure of distant awe. To the powerful, he was a rival cloaked in charm. But for all his fortune, the merchant desired one thing above all else, a treasure so rare that kings would kneel for it, a talisman that would set his name among legends. That desire led him to the diamond. It came to him not through the sanctity of temples, nor through the blessing of priests, but in the quiet of a private deal, whispered in shadows. A wandering trader, his eyes haunted and his voice low, presented the merchant with a gem wrapped in silk. When the cloth was drawn back, even the flickering lamplight seemed to pause. The stone burned blue, deeper than the ocean, brighter than the winter sky. It was not merely beautiful, it was alive. The trader's words were simple, spoken like a warning disguised as an offer. This is no jewel of men. It is the eye of a goddess. It brings fortune to the hands that hold it, but it also brings ruin. Keep it if you dare, sell it if you must, but know this: it has never left a man unharmed. The merchant laughed. He was not a man who bent to tales of curses or gods. To him, the stone was nothing more than a jewel of impossible rarity, a fortune condensed into a single shimmering fire. He paid the trader generously, though in truth no amount of gold could match the jewel's worth. And when the man departed, the merchant thought no more of him. From that night forward, his fortune seemed to swell. Ships returned with double their expected cargo. Debts once thought lost were repaid in full. Rivals fell mysteriously into ruin, their goods seized or their fleets swallowed by storms. The merchant's name spread farther than ever before, his halls filled with music, his tables with wine, and his wives and children dressed in the richest silks. He placed the diamond in a place of honor, set within a carved ivory box, and each night before retiring, he would open it to watch its light dance across the walls. He began to call it his guardian. His family called it his blessing. Servants whispered that the gods themselves had chosen him. But fortune is a flame, and every flame eventually consumes what feeds it. The first shadow came quietly. A trusted business partner vanished at sea, his fleet lost without trace. Another, a loyal friend, was struck by fever and perished within days. The merchant dismissed these as misfortunes of life, but in the silence of night, as he gazed into the diamond's light, doubt whispered at the edges of his mind. Soon, the changes grew closer. His eldest son, a man of strong will, grew restless. He claimed the diamond unsettled his dreams, that its glow haunted him with visions of endless water and voices crying in languages unknown. His protests turned into arguments, his arguments into rage, until finally he left the household, swearing never to return. The merchant, consumed with pride and blinded by wealth, disowned him on the spot, convinced that his son's weakness was rebellion, not truth. Then sickness came to the house. A daughter, fair and gentle, fell ill with fevers that no physician could cure. Day by day her strength waned, and in her last moments she clutched her father's hand and whispered that she had seen a blue flame hovering over her bed. The merchant buried her with the songs of priests echoing through the streets. Yet even as he wept, he did not look upon the diamond with suspicion. Instead, he swore to guard it more fiercely, as though her death demanded that he hold it tighter. But the jewel was not finished with him. The once proud merchant began to unravel. He grew distant at his feasts, staring into nothing as music swirled around him. At night, he no longer slept beside his wives, but remained alone, hunched over the jewel, watching it glow in the dark. Servants whispered of muttering voices behind closed doors, of their master speaking not to himself but to someone unseen. Some claimed they heard laughter when no one else was in the chamber. Others swore they saw the jewel pulse with light, casting shadows that moved though no candle burned. Wealth still flowed, but no longer brought joy. His riches turned into burdens. His halls grew silent. One by one, his remaining children fell to tragedy. Accidents, illnesses, despair. The laughter that had once filled his house was replaced by wails and silence. The great merchant who had once commanded fleets now sat in solitude, his eyes sunken, his body frail, clutching the diamond as if it were the last anchor of his soul. Madness soon claimed him fully. He ceased his trade, dismissed his servants, and barred his doors. Rumors spread in the markets of a man who had bargained with dark forces, who had sold not only his wealth but his bloodline to a cursed jewel. The mighty merchant became a figure of fear, his name whispered only as a warning. And then one night he vanished. At dawn, fishermen along the Ganges found his body drifting among the reeds. His face was calm, almost serene, as though he had surrendered to the river willingly. His hands were open, his body unscarred. But beside him, resting on the river's surface as if water could not claim it, lay the diamond. It gleamed with the same cold fire, untouched, unbroken, its light casting eerie ripples across the current. The fishermen, terrified, refused to touch it. Word spread quickly, and soon the priests came, their faces pale, their voices heavy with dread. They lifted the jewel, wrapped it in sacred cloth, and carried it back to their temple. Yet even as they walked, the air seemed heavier, and the river behind them whispered like a voice sighing in relief. The merchant was buried with little ceremony, his wealth scattered, his legacy drowned in shame. His name became a cautionary tale, a reminder that some treasures are not gifts but curses disguised in beauty. And the diamond? It remained silent and waiting, its blue heart gleaming in the shadows. Those who looked upon it swore it was not merely reflecting light, but generating it, as though it lived, as though it breathed. The stone of eternal night had claimed another soul, and those who guarded it knew this was only the beginning. Across the oceans, across deserts and empires, the diamond once torn from the goddess's brow found its way into new hands. No longer did it rest in temples or in the coffers of merchants who bartered in shadows. This time, it crossed the world itself, carried in the grip of greed, ambition, and blood. The jewel reached Europe, and there, it would find a stage grander than any it had known before. In the year 1668, the diamond entered France. The country was a land of splendor and shadows, ruled by a monarch who called himself the Sun King, Louis XIV. His court at Versailles shimmered with excess, with chandeliers brighter than stars, with halls so vast they swallowed footsteps. Here, wealth was not simply wealth. It was spectacle, it was power, it was immortality carved into marble and silk. And Louis XIV, whose pride was as boundless as his dominion, demanded treasures that would mirror his glory. The diamond was brought before him by Jean-Baptiste Tavernier, a French trader whose journeys to India had filled his name with legend. Tavernier had seen temples, deserts, and palaces, but he had never seen a jewel like this. When he first unwrapped it before the king, those present gasped. The stone burned with a blue fire so intense that candles seemed dim beside it. It was not merely a diamond. It was a shard of the heavens, a frozen flame that seemed to throb with life. Louis XIV was entranced. He had jewels beyond count, yet none matched this. He named it the French blue, and in his eyes, it was not just a treasure but a symbol. Just as the sun ruled the sky, he believed he would rule the earth, and this diamond, blazing like a captured star, would stand as proof. He ordered it to be recut and polished by the finest craftsmen in Paris, who labored tirelessly to shape it into a gem fit for his crown. Under their hands, the stone became sharper, brighter, more perfect than ever before. But perfection has its price. Even as the jewel took on its new form, whispers began to stir. One craftsman lost his hand to an accident in his workshop, his tools shattering as though struck by invisible force. Another fell from a scaffold, his body broken on the stones below. Servants who touched the gem spoke of nightmares that clung to them even in daylight, visions of dark rivers and cold, staring eyes. Yet none dared speak openly, for the Sun King's desire was stronger than their fear. When the French blue was finally unveiled, set into gold and displayed before the court, it was as if the room itself bowed before its brilliance. Courtiers pressed close to glimpse it, ladies fainted at its beauty, and poets struggled to find words grand enough to capture its fire. To many, it seemed that France had stolen a piece of the divine, that the king himself had caged the sky. But beauty, when born of stolen gods, does not shine without shadow. At first, fortune seemed to follow the stone. France's armies triumphed in wars. Versailles rose in glory, and Louis XIV basked in the adoration of his court. The French blue was paraded at banquets, worn at ceremonies, and guarded as though it were the beating heart of the kingdom itself. Yet soon, the whispers of doom returned. Those who wore the jewel at the king's request found themselves plagued by misfortune. A duchess who pinned it to her gown fell ill with fever and died within the year. A courtier who held it briefly was thrown from his horse and crushed beneath its hoofs. A young servant, tasked with polishing its surface, was found lifeless in his chamber, his face frozen in a mask of terror. Some said these were coincidences. Others lowered their voices and spoke of a curse that had followed the stone across oceans, from temple to court. The goddess from whom it had been stolen was said to be patient in her vengeance, her reach unending. And now, her wrath had found a new host in the kingdom of France. Louis XIV, proud and unyielding, dismissed such tales. He wore the diamond as a badge of triumph, unconcerned with the fate of those beneath him. Yet even he could not escape the shadow forever. In his later years, his body began to betray him, pain and illness clung to him, sores spreading across his skin, his strength fading though his will remained fierce. Physicians attended him endlessly, yet none could cure the suffering that hollowed his once mighty frame. And as the king waned, so too did those closest to the diamond. His court, once dazzling with life, grew marked by death. A mistress collapsed in her chamber. A minister was struck by sudden madness, raving of blue flames before his heart gave out. Servants whispered that to touch the diamond was to sign one's own death warrant. But the Sun King, though weakened, refused to part with it. To him, the jewel was not a curse but a crown. If it burned, then he would burn with it. The curse did not roar, it crept. It lingered in shadows, waited in silence, and struck with precision. And though Louis XIV reigned for more than 70 years, longer than any monarch before him, his final days were marked by pain, loss, and the weight of a jewel that glittered cold and merciless in the dark. By the time his body was laid to rest, the court was divided. Some believed the diamond had been a blessing, a symbol of France's golden age. Others swore it had drained the life of all who neared it. But none could deny that death and ruin seemed to follow in its wake. The French blue remained, gleaming with unholy brilliance, untouched by sorrow, unscarred by time. Those who looked upon it swore they saw more than light within its depths. They saw movement, shadows shifting as though something watched from within. And those who turned away felt its gaze still upon them, following, waiting. As the Sun King fell into silence, the jewel remained alive. And with each death, each whisper, its legend grew darker, its hunger sharper. For the curse had not ended with the king. It had only begun. The king himself had fallen ill, and whispers spread that those who touched the diamond met sudden, violent ends. The jewel, now named the French blue, was no longer just a treasure. It was a predator disguised as beauty, waiting for its next victim. In the glittering halls of Versailles, where chandeliers hung like constellations and silk rustled like whispers of heaven, the jewel once again found its place. The French blue, as it was called, had passed from the hands of Louis XIV into the royal treasury. Generations admired it, coveted it, and feared it, but none could resist its beauty. It gleamed not as a stone of this earth, but as something stolen from the sky. By the late 18th century, that sky had grown heavy with storm. France was restless. The poor starved, the rich feasted, and the palace at Versailles seemed less a symbol of power than a fortress of arrogance. And in the center of this glittering world stood a queen who would be remembered not for her majesty, but for her fall, Marie Antoinette. She was young when she came to France, foreign-born, a girl thrown into the fire of politics and luxury. The people distrusted her. The court scrutinized her, yet she clung to her crown with the grace of one determined never to falter. Beauty, charm, and extravagance became her armor. She surrounded herself with jewels, gowns, and feasts, each more lavish than the last, as though by drowning herself in splendor, she might silence the shadows gathering beyond the palace walls. Among her treasures was the diamond, the French blue. It came to her as part of the crown jewels, a legacy of kings past. When she first wore it, the court gasped. Beneath candlelight, it shimmered with a light colder than ice, its fire so deep that even gold seemed dull beside it. To the courtiers, it was proof of her grandeur, a jewel that placed her above ordinary mortals. But among the whispers that filled Versailles, there were others, darker and more dangerous. Servants remembered stories of death and ruin that followed the stone. Old men muttered that no hand could wear it without paying in blood. And as Marie Antoinette paraded it at gatherings, the rumors spread. Some swore they saw the jewel change hue, burning crimson for an instant as though it tasted blood. Others whispered that the queen seemed different when she wore it, her laughter too sharp, her eyes too bright, as though the stone itself possessed her. The more she adorned herself with it, the more those whispers turned into prophecies of doom. Outside the palace, France seethed. The people starved while the court bathed in gold. Bread was scarce, taxes crushed the poor, and the gap between the rulers and the ruled became a wound festering into fury. Every extravagance of the queen became a weapon in the mouths of her enemies, and the diamond, gleaming on her breast, became not a symbol of majesty, but of indifference. They called her Madame Deficit, the queen who feasted while children cried for food. They cursed her jewels, her gowns, her endless hunger for beauty, while they themselves hungered for bread. And though few knew the ancient legend of the diamond, its cold light seemed to embody the curse not only of a jewel, but of a dynasty. As a revolution stirred, Versailles itself seemed to tremble. Riots broke out in Paris, pamphlets spread venom through the streets, and the voices of the people grew louder, demanding change, demanding blood. Yet within the palace walls, the queen still wore her jewels. Still, she pinned the French blue to her gowns, as though to defy the anger of the world outside. Some said she believed it a charm, a talisman that would protect her from ruin. Others claimed she wore it out of arrogance, refusing to bend even as the ground shook beneath her. But the diamond had never been a guardian. It had always been a predator. As the revolution deepened, tragedy seeped into the queen's life. Friends were arrested, nobles fled, and the once unshakable walls of Versailles cracked under the weight of betrayal. Yet still the diamond gleamed, cold and unyielding, its fire undimmed by the chaos it seemed to summon. Those who had once admired it began to fear it, whispering that it was the jewel, not the people, that demanded the queen's head. By 1792, the monarchy crumbled. The king was imprisoned, the palace abandoned, and Marie Antoinette was dragged from her throne into a world of stone walls and iron bars. In the darkness of her cell, stripped of her gowns, stripped of her power, she remained haunted. Some say the jewel was taken from her before her imprisonment. Yet others whisper that she smuggled it still, hidden close, clutched as though it were the last piece of her former glory. What is certain is this: the curse did not leave her. As she awaited her fate, her hair turned white within days, her face hollowed by grief and fear. The people who once gasped at her jewels now screamed for her blood. She was no longer queen, no longer untouchable. She was mortal, fragile, doomed, and the shadow of the diamond clung to her until the end. On the morning of October 16th, 1793, Marie Antoinette was led through the streets of Paris. The crowd jeered. Stones and curses hurled at her as she passed. Her once royal figure was clothed in plain white, her head held high despite the hatred that reigned upon her. And there, in the distance, rose the guillotine, its blade gleaming in the gray light of dawn. As she mounted the steps, witnesses swore that something impossible occurred. Among the crowd, someone held aloft the diamond. Whether a guard, a thief, or a phantom, no one knew. And in that instant, beneath the executioner's steel, the French blue shimmered crimson, as though the goddess's wrath had awakened once more. The blade fell, the queen's head rolled, and the jewel burned with a fire that was not of this world. The curse had claimed another, and France itself was swallowed by blood. The queen was dead, but the diamond lived. And as it gleamed crimson on that day of execution, a question haunted those who saw it. Was it merely reflecting the horror of the revolution, or was it feeding on it, drinking in the death it had long awaited? The guillotine fell, and with it the reign of kings. France, once a land of silk and glittering halls, drowned in fire and blood. The revolution did not merely take heads. It shattered centuries of power, tore palaces to ruins, and sent treasures scattering into darkness. In those years of chaos, while nobles fled and mobs stormed the vaults of Versailles, the French blue vanished. One day it gleamed upon the breast of a queen, and the next it was gone. The disappearance was not recorded in any ledger. No soldier boasted of seizing it. No revolutionary displayed it as a prize of the people. It slipped from history like a ghost fleeing through the smoke. For some, this was no mystery at all. They believed the diamond had drunk its fill of blood and returned to the goddess from whom it had been stolen. But for others, The truth was more earthly and far more chilling. The jewel had not vanished. It had been taken. Rumors spread through Paris like fever. Some whispered that a revolutionary official had hidden it in his coat, only to be stabbed in an alley hours later, his corpse stripped of everything but the diamond, which gleamed beside him in the mud. Others claimed a servant of the royal household had fled with it, clutching it close as he disappeared into the forests. There were even tales of soldiers, drunk with victory, who passed it from hand to hand in a tavern before each one died in sudden and violent accidents, leaving the jewel abandoned on a blood-stained table until another fool picked it up. But no record confirmed these stories. They were fragments, rumors carried like smoke by the winds of revolution. And yet, wherever the diamond passed, death seemed to follow. For decades, the French blue was lost to history. No court, no treasury, no museum displayed it. It became a legend whispered in marketplaces, in candlelit taverns, in the corners of Europe's great cities. Collectors obsessed over it. Nobles cursed it, and thieves dreamed of it. Some swore they had seen it, glowing faintly in the hands of smugglers along the Mediterranean coast. Others claimed it surfaced in Istanbul, or Lisbon, or St. Petersburg, always slipping away before it could be claimed. Each tale ended the same: a corpse, a ruin, a whisper that the stone was cursed. One story told of a Dutch merchant who bought the gem in secret, hiding it in his vault beneath his house. For a year, his trade flourished, but then misfortunes fell like rain. His ships sank, his warehouses burned, and his only son perished in a riding accident. Desperate, the merchant tried to sell the diamond, but every buyer refused, claiming they felt dread simply by looking upon it. In despair, he hurled it into a canal. Yet the next morning, it was found on his doorstep, gleaming with cold light. Weeks later, he was discovered dead in his study, the diamond resting on his chest. Another tale spoke of a Turkish sultan who acquired it through smugglers. He displayed it in his court, surrounded by gold and silk. But soon his harem was struck by plague. His generals betrayed him, and his throne collapsed. On the night he was strangled, the diamond was said to have vanished from his treasury, as if it had walked out on its own. Collectors whispered these stories like prayers of warning, yet still they hungered for it. The diamond was not merely a jewel. It was a myth, a phantom of greed and fear. To possess it, even for a moment, was to hold history itself. Decades passed, and the French blue became more ghost than stone. Scholars argued whether it had ever truly existed, whether it was lost to time or melted down and destroyed. But the curse has patience. It waits. And in the year 1812, nearly 2 decades after the revolution had drowned France in blood, a strange event occurred in London. A jeweler on a quiet street unveiled a new diamond in his shop window. It was large, though not as vast as the French blue had been described, and cut into a different shape. Yet its color was unmistakable. A deep, hypnotic blue, glowing as though the heavens themselves had been captured inside. Passers-by stopped to stare, their faces pale. Collectors whispered in excitement and dread. For though the cut was new, though its size was reduced, the stone in the window looked hauntingly familiar. It looked like the French blue returned from the grave. The jewel that vanished in blood and chaos now reappeared, its curse unbroken, its hunger unquenched. When the jewel resurfaced in London, it was no longer the same as the one torn from the goddess's statue centuries before. It had been recut, reshaped, its size diminished, but its fire remained untouched, a deep blue flame that seemed both eternal and unnatural. The city of London, with its fog-shrouded streets and rising towers of industry, became the diamond's new hunting ground. It was in the early 19th century when the gem found its way into the hands of Henry Philip Hope, a wealthy banker whose fortune stretched across continents. Hope was no ordinary collector. His family, Dutch by origin, had grown rich on trade, banking, and influence, and in his London mansion he assembled one of the most dazzling collections of jewels Europe had ever seen. Yet among all the emeralds, rubies, and pearls, there was one jewel that stole his breath and anchored his obsession: the blue diamond. It had passed quietly into his possession, its trail through smugglers and jewelers obscured by secrecy. But when Hope unveiled it, the world took notice. The stone was unlike anything England had seen. Under daylight, it burned with an icy brilliance, yet under lamplight it glowed as though alive, shifting in color from deep sapphire to violet fire. Visitors gasped when they saw it, collectors envied it, and whispers once again began to curl around it like smoke. Hope did not believe in curses. To him, the diamond was not a talisman of doom, but the crown of his collection, a symbol of his wealth and refinement. He displayed it proudly, nestled in velvet, a jewel fit for kings now resting in the hands of a banker. In catalogs and descriptions, it was admired, studied, and envied, and soon the stone became tied not to France or royalty, but to Hope himself. The world began to call it by a new name, the Hope Diamond. Yet names do not change destiny. At first, nothing seemed amiss. Hope continued to prosper, his family basking in luxury. His mansion was filled with light and music, his parties attended by nobles and politicians who marveled at the jewel. But slowly, subtly, cracks began to appear. Deals soured. Investments failed. Lawsuits multiplied. It was as though the fortune that had once flowed like a river began to dry, leaving behind only dust. And worse still, the shadow of the diamond began to creep not just over Henry Philip Hope, but over his heirs. When Hope died in 1839, the diamond passed into the tangled hands of his family. What should have been a legacy of pride turned into a curse of division. The Hope estate, once vast and unshakable, became the battlefield of quarrels. Brothers turned against sisters, cousins against cousins. Greed mingled with suspicion, and the jewel became not a treasure, but a weapon, wielded in courts and whispered over in halls. Lawsuits erupted, dragging on for years, consuming fortunes in endless disputes. One heir, desperate to secure his claim, gambled recklessly and lost everything. Another fell into madness, speaking of blue flames that haunted him, voices that whispered at night from velvet cases where the diamond slept. Marriages collapsed, friendships shattered, and each generation seemed more cursed than the last. It was as if the diamond, once the pride of a queen and the glory of a king, now delighted in the slow destruction of an entire family line. London society began to take notice. Whispers spread in salons and drawing rooms, where nobles remarked that the Hopes, once so powerful, were now shadows of themselves. The jewel, they said, was beautiful but hungry. It had drained the wealth of kings, toppled queens, and now it was feasting on bankers. By the late 19th century, the Hope fortune was crumbling. Debt gnawed at its edges. Lawsuits left its heirs exhausted, and the once great collection was broken apart piece by piece. But through it all, the diamond remained, gleaming coldly, untouched by the ruin it created. And those who gazed upon it swore they felt something watching them from within its depths. Some saw shifting shadows, others a glimmer of red like hidden blood. Servants who handled it complained of nightmares, waking with screams of drowning or being buried alive. A few even refused to touch it at all, insisting that it burned their skin like fire. Still, the Hopes clung to it. Even as their fortune dissolved, even as their legacy rotted, they could not part with the jewel. It was as though the diamond itself commanded them, whispering promises of restoration, dangling the illusion of wealth just beyond their grasp. But the curse was not finished. It was only tightening its grip. The last heirs of the family were left quarreling over scraps of an empire. Madness, betrayal, and despair marked their decline. One was said to have died alone, muttering of eyes in the dark. Another lost everything in a single lawsuit, his name dragged through scandal. The diamond had not simply cursed them with misfortune. It had hollowed them out, leaving only ruin where a dynasty had once stood. And yet, the jewel gleamed brighter than ever. It had gained a new name, one it still carries to this day, the Hope Diamond. But the irony of that name was not lost on those who knew its story. for it brought no hope, only despair. No fortune, only ruin. No life, only death. From the temples of India to the palaces of France, from the guillotines of revolution to the parlors of London bankers, the diamond had woven a trail of sorrow that stretched across centuries. And though it now bore the name of hope, its shadow had never been darker. The jewel, now named the Hope Diamond, had destroyed yet another family. Its legacy was no longer just a legend whispered by priests or courtiers. It was a curse written into history itself. And still, the stone was hungry, waiting for its next victim. By the late 19th century, the Hope family was shattered, their fortune dissolved into ashes, their legacy marked not by triumph, but by lawsuits, betrayals, and madness. Yet through it all, the diamond survived. It always survived. Like a predator that never starved, it moved silently from one hand to another, patient in its hunger, relentless in its curse. And then, as the century turned, the jewel crossed the ocean. It was a time when America was rising, when Washington, D.C. glistened with ambition and wealthy families competed to outshine the nobility of Europe. America was a land that saw itself as untouchable, far from the curses and shadows of the old world. But some curses do not fade with distance. They travel, they follow. The Hope Diamond, as it was now called, arrived in this new world and quickly found eager hands. Collectors, financiers, and socialites craved it, not because they knew its history, but because of its beauty, to where it was to declare oneself not merely wealthy, but legendary. Yet wherever it appeared, tragedies soon followed. One of the earliest whispers spoke of a man who acquired the diamond briefly before selling it on. He boasted of his luck, claiming to have held a fortune in his hands. Days later, he was thrown from his carriage in a violent accident, his body crushed beneath the wheels. The diamond, untouched, gleamed in the pocket of his coat when rescuers pulled him from the wreckage. Another tale told of a Washington society woman who borrowed the jewel for a gathering. Guests gasped at its brilliance as it caught the gaslight, but by dawn her marriage collapsed in scandal. Within weeks, she had vanished from society, ruined, her name whispered only as a cautionary tale. And then came the suicides. A banker, desperate to restore his failing fortune, purchased the jewel, believing it would symbolize his return to power. Instead, his investments collapsed, his reputation turned to dust, and one evening he shot himself in his study. His servants found him slumped across his desk, the diamond glittering coldly beside the pistol. Washington, D.C. was a city of whispers. Senators, socialites, and journalists alike carried the stories, their voices hushed yet urgent. They began to say the same thing that had been whispered in India, in France, in London. The diamond was cursed. To hold it was to invite ruin. To wear it was to invite death. Yet the curse did not frighten everyone. For some, it added allure. There are always those who believe they can outwit fate, who see themselves as stronger than the shadows that have claimed others. And so the diamond moved again, claimed by a new collector, then another, each eager, each certain that they would be the one to tame it. But the curse was patient. It fed on ambition, on pride, on greed. And each new owner became its feast. One particularly tragic tale unfolded when a wealthy man gave the jewel as a gift to his young wife. She wore it proudly at every gathering, delighting in the envy it inspired. But soon, her health began to wither. She grew pale, frail, plagued by fevers no doctor could explain. Within months, she was dead, her body lowered into the earth while the diamond gleamed as brightly as ever. Her husband, broken by grief, drowned himself in the Potomac River weeks later. Still, the stone traveled. Still, it claimed lives. In parlors and newspapers, people began to call it a phantom, a jewel that glittered with beauty but hid a soul of malice. And when, in a twist of fate, it found its way into the hands of performers, the curse showed its cruelty with no mercy at all. The story that silenced even skeptics came with an actress. She was bold, dazzling, adored by audiences, her name on every lip in Washington. When she borrowed the Hope Diamond for a stage performance, the crowd gasped as its fire caught the lights, turning her into a vision of celestial beauty. She laughed, she sang, she danced beneath its glow, basking in the admiration it brought. But as the curtain fell that night, so did she. Her body collapsed backstage, lifeless before it struck the floor. No illness, no wound, no explanation. The only thing that shone in the dim lamplight was the diamond, gleaming as though it had been waiting all along. The whispers became certainty. The curse had crossed oceans. The Hope Diamond was no longer just a jewel of kings and bankers. It was now America's haunting. And those who watched it pass from hand to hand knew one truth that no wealth, no power, no ambition could deny. The stone did not belong to man. It belonged to death. The actress was dead, the audience still echoing with her laughter. And the diamond lay untouched beside her body, its blue fire glowing brighter than ever, as though it had claimed yet another soul and was already searching for its next. By the early 20th century, the Hope Diamond was no longer the jewel of kings or the whispered curse of European courts. It had crossed oceans, left bodies in its wake, and become a phantom treasure that moved from one ill-fated hand to another. To most, it was a legend, a stone steeped in stories too grim to ignore. But to Evelyn Walsh McLean, it was something else entirely. Evelyn was born into wealth, a socialite of dazzling reputation. Washington, D.C. was her stage, and she played her part with brilliance. She was young, beautiful, spirited, and unafraid of the whispers that clung to high society. Where others bowed to superstition, she laughed. Where others trembled at tales of curses, she mocked them with champagne in hand. To her, life was meant for spectacle, and nothing offered spectacle quite like the Hope Diamond. In 1911, the stone was placed before her. She saw its deep, hypnotic fire and felt not dread but delight. Where others shivered at its legend, she saw only beauty. She insisted it must be hers. And so, ignoring every warning, Evelyn Walsh McLean purchased the jewel. The Hope Diamond, once the possession of monarchs, was now the plaything of an American socialite. She wore it to lavish parties, its blue fire catching the light of chandeliers, dazzling her guests. She flaunted it as a charm, a talisman, even a joke. When whispers of the curse reached her, she laughed and claimed she welcomed it. If the jewel brought sorrow, she said, then she would meet sorrow with a smile. She even tied it around the neck of her dog at times, parading the beast through gardens and ballrooms while her guests gasped in scandal. But curses do not care for mockery. At first, her fortune seemed untouchable. Her parties grew more extravagant, her reputation more notorious. Yet slowly, the curse began its work. Not with sudden death, but with the quiet, patient unraveling of everything she loved. It began with her family. Evelyn's young son, a child of bright laughter and innocent charm, grew ill. Doctors came and went, their remedies useless, their words hollow. Within months, the boy was gone, his laughter silenced forever. Evelyn clutched the diamond in her grief, as though daring it to explain itself, as though demanding it return what it had taken. But the jewel only gleamed, its cold fire indifferent to her tears. Then came her husband, Edward McLean, heir to the Washington Post and a man of wealth and promise. At first, he dismissed the rumors as Evelyn did. But as time passed, his mind began to fracture. Business decisions turned reckless. Investments collapsed. Scandals multiplied. Whispers of infidelity, gambling, and drunken escapades tainted his name. Slowly, madness consumed him. By the time he was confined to a sanitarium, he was no longer the man Evelyn had married, but a broken shell, his mind lost to shadows. Evelyn herself was not spared. Though she laughed at the curse, her fortune began to dissolve. Lawsuits drained her wealth, debts multiplied, and the glittering empire she once commanded crumbled beneath her feet. She sold off pieces of her estate, her jewels, her treasures, but not the Hope Diamond. never the diamond. Even as it seemed to devour everything around her, she clung to it with the desperation of a soul chained to fate. Friends began to whisper that the jewel owned her, that she no longer wore it as a symbol of defiance, but because she could not part with it. Some said they saw her late at night, alone in her chamber, staring into its depths as though searching for answers, as though listening to voices only she could hear. Others claimed the diamond's glow seemed stronger in her presence, pulsing faintly like the heartbeat of a living thing. Tragedy did not stop. Another child was lost, this time to a sudden accident. Evelyn's family name became a tattered echo, her fortune reduced to memory. The glamorous socialite who once mocked the curse now lived in shadows, clinging to the stone as though it were both her tormentor and her last companion. In her final years, she was alone. The laughter of her parties silenced, the halls of her estate emptied. Those who visited described her as a ghost of herself, her eyes hollow, her spirit drained. And yet, always the diamond remained near. She wore it still, as if it had claimed her completely, as if she belonged not to her family, nor to society, nor even to herself, but to the jewel. When Evelyn Walsh McLean died in 1947, the diamond did not vanish into the earth with her. It remained untouched, untarnished, gleaming as brightly as ever. Those who sorted through her estate found it among her possessions, still nestled in velvet, still radiating its cold, merciless beauty. And so the curse claimed another. For Evelyn had mocked the legend, but the legend had answered. It had taken her children, her husband, her fortune, and finally her spirit. And in the end, she did not own the diamond. The diamond owned her. When she died, alone and broken, Evelyn still clutched the hope diamond, as though it were her master, as though it had bound her soul. The curse had not ended with her. It only waited for its next victim. When Evelyn Walsh McLean died, her estate was burdened by debts as vast as the halls that once held her laughter. Her treasures, her jewels, her silks and chandeliers were sold piece by piece, stripped from the legacy she once commanded. Among them lay the most infamous jewel of all, the Hope Diamond. It had sat in her possession for decades, feeding on her family's tragedies, gleaming as her children died, as her husband lost his mind, as her fortune crumbled into dust. Now, with her death, the diamond waited once more, patient, cold, and eternal. At first, it passed through the hands of dealers. Jewelers and collectors circled like vultures, drawn not only by its value, but by the story that clung to it like smoke. To own the Hope Diamond was to hold beauty beyond compare, but it was also to invite whispers of curses and doom. Few dared keep it long. The jewel moved from vault to vault, each owner eager to profit, but reluctant to claim it for themselves. Finally, in 1958, it was donated to the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. The gift came from the jeweler Harry Winston, who, perhaps wary of the curse, chose to send the stone not by armored guard nor secure convoy, but by ordinary mail. Wrapped in brown paper, nestled in a simple box, the Hope Diamond traveled through the postal system like a trinket of no consequence. Yet even in its journey, legend clung close. For the mailman who delivered it was later struck in a car accident, his leg broken, his life forever altered. The Smithsonian, unprepared for such a gift, received the diamond with both awe and unease. Here at last, the infamous jewel would be displayed for the public, no longer hidden in vaults or clutched in trembling hands. The curse, if one believed in such things, would now be shared with millions. From a moment the Hope Diamond was placed in its glass case, crowds gathered. Visitors pressed forward, their eyes wide, their breath caught in their throats. Children gasped, women fainted, men stared in silence. For no photograph, no description, no whispered rumor could capture the living fire of the stone. It glowed with an inner light, blue as twilight, yet with depths that seemed endless, as if it held within it a secret sky. But beauty was not all that lingered in its presence. The guards who stood watch at night began to whisper strange things. Footsteps echoed in empty halls, slow and deliberate, as though someone unseen paced before the diamond's case. Shadows stretched across the marble floors when no one was there. Some guards swore they heard faint voices, a woman weeping, a man shouting, a child laughing, sounds that drifted through the museum long after the last visitor had gone. At times, the alarms triggered with no cause. The glass case shook faintly, though untouched. And more than once, guards reported that the diamond itself seemed to glow brighter at night, casting a pale blue light into the darkness, as though it breathed. Visitors, too, felt its power. Some fainted suddenly before the case, collapsing with no warning. Others claimed dizziness, a chill that gripped them from head to toe, or a sense of being watched by unseen eyes. One man whispered that when he leaned close, he saw not his reflection in the glass, but another face staring back, a gaunt, hollow-eyed figure that vanished when he blinked. Yet the crowds never stopped. If anything, the rumors fed the fascination. People came not only to marvel at the jewel, but to feel its presence, to test themselves against its legend. Newspapers published stories of its curse. Documentaries filmed its history, and the Hope Diamond became one of the Smithsonian's most famous treasures. But the curse, if it could be called that, did not end simply because the diamond was now caged in glass. Death still followed in strange patterns. A curator involved in its early display was struck with sudden illness and died within weeks. A staff member was injured in a freak accident at the museum. Visitors who wrote of mocking the curse reported misfortunes afterward. Accidents, losses, illnesses that defied explanation. The jewel, it seemed, had not lost its hunger. It had only widened its reach. And then came the whispers of something stranger still. On nights when the moon shone through the museum's high windows, some claimed the diamond changed. Its deep blue seemed to fade, replaced by a red glow, faint but unmistakable, as though the stone's heart beat with blood. Others said they saw it pulse, the color shifting with rhythm, like the breath of something alive. Guards swore they never touched the case again on such nights, keeping their distance, pretending not to see. Visitors who heard the tales leaned close to the glass, their faces pale in the moonlight, waiting for the moment when the stone would shift, when it would reveal that it was not merely a jewel, but a living curse, bound and eternal. The Smithsonian called it science, phosphorescence, a rare reaction of the diamond's unique structure. But those who saw it with their own eyes never forgot, for it did not look like science. It looked like life. The Hope Diamond had crossed from temples to palaces, from guillotines to ballrooms, from mansions to vaults, and now it sat in the heart of a museum, where millions could gaze upon it. But the curse had not faded. It had not been tamed. It only waited, its fire shifting in the moonlight as though it breathed. Some who walked the museum at night swore they saw it change, its blue fire turning red, as if the diamond drew breath. And if it breathed, they whispered, then surely it still hungered. For centuries, the Hope Diamond had moved in shadows. It passed from thieves to kings, from revolutionaries to socialites. Its story written not in ledgers, but in blood. In palaces and in parlors, it claimed lives, fortunes, and legacies, leaving behind only whispers of its curse. But in the 20th century, the world had changed. Empires waned, reason rose, and men of science declared that no jewel could carry malice, no stone could breathe with hunger. And so, under the white lights of laboratories, the Hope Diamond was laid bare. Scientists at the Smithsonian and beyond studied its every facet. They weighed it, measured it, examined its crystalline structure under microscopes. They tested its hardness, its angles, its spectral fire. To them, it was not a curse, but a marvel of geology, a diamond formed deep within the earth over billions of years, carried upward by volcanic fire, carved by men's hands, and polished into a wonder. Yet even in the language of science, the Hope Diamond defied simplicity. When exposed to ultraviolet light, it did not merely glow as other diamonds sometimes do. Instead, it revealed something uncanny. After the lamps were switched off, after the room was returned to darkness, the stone continued to burn with an otherworldly glow. Not blue, but red. A deep, bloody crimson that lingered for several seconds, pulsing faintly like the dying embers of a fire. Phosphorescence, the scientists called it, a natural quirk of its atomic structure, an explanation as neat and rational as any textbook could provide. But those who witnessed it, who stood in the silent dark as the diamond smoldered with a light that looked less like science and more like blood, felt no comfort in such words. To them, it was not phosphorescence. It was memory. They said the diamond was revealing what it had consumed, that each death, each tragedy, each drop of sorrow seeped into its core, and in the dark, the jewel bled it out in crimson light. The red glow, they whispered, was not science, but spirit. The lives it had taken, the blood it had drunk, the curse it carried still. The debate raged in hushed tones. Some scientists laughed at the superstition, calling it the imagination of frightened minds. Others, more quietly, admitted that they felt something uncanny when working with the stone, something that unsettled their reason. One researcher confessed to sleepless nights after handling it, plagued by dreams of drowning in a river of red, the diamond floating above him like a burning eye. Another described a sense of being watched whenever he leaned too close, as though the jewel were studying him in return. In one experiment, the stone was sealed in a chamber, observed by cameras under shifting lights. The scientists recorded its glow, its strange shifts in color, its persistence even after exposure had ended. The data was undeniable, the results explainable. Yet when the lights returned, one assistant swore the diamond had changed position slightly within its mouth. No one else confirmed it, and the claim was dismissed. But the assistant resigned days later, unwilling ever to enter the lab again. Stories began to spread among the staff. Equipment malfunctioned near the diamond. Files were misplaced, experiments disrupted by sudden accidents. A technician broke his hand in a freak fall. Another nearly lost his eyesight in an unrelated explosion. Yet both had worked with the diamond weeks earlier. Coincidence, the rational world declared. But the whispers grew. And then there were the dreams. One researcher, a man known for his skepticism, reported an experience he refused to write in any official record. He claimed the diamond appeared to him in his sleep, not as a jewel, but as a presence, vast, cold, and sentient. In the dream, it spoke without words, pouring images into his mind. Temples collapsing, guillotines falling, bodies drifting in rivers, all bathed in blue fire. He awoke trembling, his sheets soaked with sweat, his throat raw from screams he could not remember making. From that night onward, he refused to touch the diamond again. To colleagues, he muttered only one thing. It spoke to me. The others dismissed it, of course. Dreams are dreams, nothing more. But the man, once a proud skeptic, carried the fear with him until his death. The Hope Diamond remained in its case, displayed as both scientific marvel and object of legend. Museums labeled it with facts, its weight, its cut, its history traced in cautious language. Yet even in the halls of science, it was the whispers that lingered longest. Visitors leaned close to the glass, searching not just for beauty, but for movement for life. Guards still reported footsteps at night. Alarms still rang without cause. And under the moonlight, the jewel still seemed to shift, glowing faintly as though it remembered every hand that had held it, every life it had taken. The scientists had measured its angles, its hardness, its glow, but they could not measure its hunger. One researcher confessed that in his dream, the diamond had spoken to him. From that night, he refused ever to touch it again. For while science declared it lifeless, he swore he had felt its soul. For centuries, men and women have argued whether the Hope Diamond's curse is real or whether it is nothing more than coincidence stitched into a story. Historians trace its journey from temple to palace, from revolution to museum. Scientists measure its glow, its angles, its weight, explaining its strange fire with the language of reason. But beneath all of this, beneath the facts and the arguments, runs a current of older whispers. Whispers that tell not of chance, but of vengeance. The tale begins not in France, nor in London, nor even in America, but in the jungles of India, where the stone was first torn from the brow of a goddess. That goddess, carved in black stone, was no gentle figure of beauty. She was a deity of war, of retribution, of balance and force through wrath. The diamond was her eye, a gift said to have been placed there by the gods themselves, glowing with the fire of the heavens. It was not meant to adorn mortal crowns. It was meant to guard her temple, to remind all who entered that divine power could be merciful, but it could also be merciless. When the thief wrenched the stone free, the guardians of the temple warned that the goddess's vengeance would follow it. Not because it was cursed in itself, but because it was bound, protected by her will. The diamond, they said, was hers, and any mortal who claimed it would be claiming war with a goddess. Through the centuries that followed, the pattern never broke. Kings died, queens fell, dynasties rotted, fortunes collapsed. To skeptics, it was chance. To believers, it was punishment. But to those who studied the oldest stories, it was something more. Not punishment, but guardianship. The diamond was not a jewel meant to bring joy. It was a weapon, disguised as beauty, placed in the world as a reminder that divine gifts are not from mortal greed. And the guardian never left it. Some legends say the goddess does not dwell in heaven or temple now, but within the stone itself. That her spirit, ancient and eternal, peers through its blue fire, watching every hand that dares to claim it. Some who gazed too long swore they felt eyes staring back, not cold like stone, but alive, burning with anger older than kingdoms. Even in the Smithsonian, where rational minds try to strip it of myth, guards whisper of her presence. They say that on nights of silence, when the halls are empty and the glass case glows in the moonlight, they feel a weight pressing on their chests, a presence heavy and watching. Some speak of dreams where the goddess appears, her eyes glowing blue, her voice a whisper of vengeance carried through centuries. Visitors who linger too long at the case sometimes leave pale and shaken. A few claim they felt their thoughts twist, as if the diamond were whispering to them in their own voice, offering promises of glory, then showing visions of ruin. Others say they hear faint music, temple bells, or chanting in a tongue no one alive now speaks. And always, the red glow lingers. The phosphorescence science calls it. But to those who believe, the crimson light is the goddess's breath, her eternal reminder that she watches, that the diamond is not dead stone, but living oath. It glows not with the light of the earth, but with the fire of her wrath. It is said that this is why no owner has ever kept it without ruin. The goddess does not allow joy from what was hers. Those who wear it wear her gaze, and she strips from them everything they hold dear. Kings lose thrones, queens lose their heads, bankers lose fortunes, mothers lose children. Not because the stone chooses, but because the guardian does. Some scholars of legend claim that if the diamond were ever returned to the ruins of her temple, the curse might end. That the goddess, once reunited with her jewel, would let her vengeance rest. But others warn that it is too late, that centuries of theft and blood have bound the curse into the stone forever. Now it does not guard the goddess. It is the goddess, and still it waits. In the museum, behind its glass, it gleams quietly as crowds shuffle past. But some whisper that the curse sleeps only because the guardian allows it. The glass is not protection for the diamond. It is protection for the world. As long as it rests there, untouched, its wrath is contained. But if it were ever taken again, stolen or sold, the curse would awaken in full. And in that awakening, the goddess's vengeance would not fall on one man, one queen, one family. It would fall on all who dared claim the stone. This is why the guards sometimes stand a little farther from the case than duty requires. Why curators cross themselves before speaking of it. Why visitors, long after leaving the museum, dream of eyes glowing blue in the darkness. For the legend has shifted. It is no longer the story of a cursed jewel. It is the story of an eternal guardian, a goddess who will never allow mortals to turn her gift into their possession. And so the diamond waits, its blue fire glowing, its red light smoldering. Science can measure it, display it, even explain it. But science cannot silence the whispers. Some say the curse lies dormant only because the diamond is caged. If ever it leaves its glass case, the guardian will awaken, and her vengeance will return to the world. Today, the Hope Diamond lies in the Smithsonian Institution, suspended in a glass case, bathed in perfect light. Millions come every year to see it. They stand in line, shuffle forward, lean close, and stare at its impossible fire. Some press their faces near the glass, try to see their reflection, try to glimpse its depths. And yet, when they walk away, many carry something they cannot explain. Some speak of a shiver that runs down their spine, a chill that no air conditioning can account for. Others say they felt eyes on them, heavy and ancient, not from the people around them, but from the jewel itself. A few describe a shimmer in the corner of their eye, a flicker of movement, as though the stone shifted when they weren't looking. And some, though they say it only in hushed tones, whisper that they heard something faint, a sigh, a whisper, a voice that brushed past their ear before vanishing into silence. The museum does not write this. In plaques and pamphlets, the Hope Diamond is presented as a geological marvel, a specimen of extraordinary rarity, its history trimmed into neat paragraphs. But the glass case does not silence the legend. It cannot silence the centuries of blood that trail behind it, because the Hope Diamond does not rest. It waits. Consider its story. A thief plucked it from the brow of a goddess and vanished into nothing. A merchant gained wealth, only to drown in the Ganges with the jewel gleaming beside him. A king paraded it in triumph, and his body withered in pain. A queen wore it to balls and lost her head beneath the guillotine. Bankers, heirs, smugglers, socialites, each one who claimed it found ruin. The diamond outlived them all. Now it sits behind glass, admired but untouched. But curses do not fade with time. They are not erased by labels or diminished by science. They sleep and they wait. At night, when the museum is dark, guards patrol its halls. They pass by the case, their footsteps echoing in silence. Some hurry, refusing to look at it too long. Others glance, only to feel their pulse quicken. A few have spoken, quietly, to colleagues, never in reports, of footsteps that follow their own, of shadows that move across marble though no light casts them, of the diamond glowing faintly when no one watches. There are stories of visitors collapsing in front of the case, fainting without warning, waking pale and trembling, unable to say what they saw. Children sometimes cry when brought too close, turning their faces away as if from something that frightens them. Photographs occasionally blur, as though the stone resisted being captured, its fire twisting into shapes that were never truly there. And always there is the red glow. Science explains it as phosphorescence, the strange quirk of the diamond structure. But to those who have seen it, in the hushed silence of the darkened halls, the glow looks less like light and more like breath. It pulses slowly, like a heart still beating, like something alive. What is the diamond now, if not a predator caged in glass? It cannot kill those who touch it, because no one dares touch it anymore. But perhaps it can still reach, through dreams, through whispers, through the shiver in the spine that visitors cannot forget. Perhaps it no longer needs to claim one owner at a time. Perhaps now, surrounded by millions of eyes, it feeds in smaller ways, stealing fragments of fear, fragments of wonder, fragments of souls that lean too close. There are those who say the curse has ended, that the museum has broken its power. But there are others who are not so sure. They whisper that the curse has not ended. It has only changed. It is dormant, biding its time, because what has always awakened it is possession, ownership, pride. Every time a hand claimed the diamond as its own, the curse answered with vengeance. And now behind glass, it belongs to no one. It rests, silent, patient, watching. But what if that changes? What if one day the diamond leaves its case? What if it is moved, stolen, or sold again? What if someone dares, as so many before them have dared, to call it theirs? Those who believe in the legend shudder at the thought. For if the curse awakens again, it may not stop with one victim. The world is smaller now, more connected. A jewel stolen once from a temple in India has already scarred kings, queens, merchants, and nations. What would it do if loosed once more into the hands of mortals? The Hope Diamond gleams still, its fire untouched by centuries. Children press their noses to the glass. Lovers hold hands in its glow. Scholars debate its chemistry. Photographers chase its light. And all the while it watches. Perhaps the curse never ended. Perhaps the goddess still looks out from within, her vengeance eternal. Perhaps the diamond does not sleep, but waits, patient, merciless, alive. And perhaps, as you lean close, as your breath fogs the glass, as your eyes catch a shimmer that was not there a moment ago, perhaps it is not you watching the diamond. Perhaps it is the diamond watching you. The Hope Diamond still rests in the Smithsonian, admired by millions. But some whisper the curse never ended. It is only waiting for its next owner. The Hope Diamond remains, locked in its glass chamber, its fire burning as it has for centuries, a jewel that has outlived kings and queens, outlasted revolutions, and devoured fortunes and families. It watches still, silent yet alive, waiting for the day when another hand dares to claim it. Perhaps the curse has ended. Perhaps it only sleeps. Or perhaps it is watching us, even now, through its eternal blue fire. What do you believe? Is the Hope Diamond merely a stone? Or is it a living reminder of vengeance that will never fade? Share your thoughts below. Every legend carries new voices, and your voice becomes part of the story. If you felt the weight of this tale, if the mystery lingered in your thoughts, then step further into this world of lost cities, cursed artifacts, and forbidden histories. Like this video to keep these legends alive. Share it so others may feel the same chill. And subscribe to join us as we uncover more stories that time itself tried to bury. The Hope Diamond may rest behind glass, but its legend is free, and it will follow wherever we go.